I never thought finding a roommate would be this complicated. Honestly, I just wanted someone who paid rent on time, didn't throw wild parties, and maybe, I don't know, respected the fact that sometimes I worked late and needed the place to be quiet. Is that too much to ask? Turns out, yeah, it is. So there I was, scrolling through roommate ads on some sketchy Craigslist-looking site. Because who really uses anything else these days? My old roommate had moved out last month, leaving me scrambling to cover rent and trying not to lose my mind in the process. The apartment was decent enough, right in the middle of the city, with a view of those ugly fire escapes and the weird little diner down the block. Perfect location if you're into overpriced lattes and people watching. I was halfway through a list of roommates wanted posts that mostly said things like chill, clean, and drama-free when I stumbled on his profile. It was simple, just a couple of photos, a short bio, and a phone number. The pictures showed a guy who looked, well, exactly like the kind of person I'd never expect to message me back. He had this intense gaze, kind of like he was both sizing you up and daring you to judge him. His hair was messy in a way that looked like he'd just rolled out of bed, but in a cool, effortless style. And something about his smile in the second picture. It wasn't really a smile, more like a smirk that made me pause. The bio said, Jason, 28, graphic designer. Introvert, looking for a roommate who keeps it low-key and doesn't mind the occasional Netflix binge. That last part caught my attention because, honestly, Netflix binges are like my cardio these days. I shot him a message, pretty casual. Hey, saw your post. Still looking for a roommate? And, to my surprise, he replied within 5 minutes. We arranged to meet the next day at a coffee shop a few blocks from my place. I was kinda nervous, not gonna lie. Meeting a stranger to live with you is weird, right? It's like inviting someone to share your space, but also your life in a way. You hope for the best, but brace for the worst. When I walked into the coffee shop, he was already there, sitting at a corner table with a black sketchbook in front of him. He looked up, caught my eye, and gave me that smirk again. Jason, he said, standing up to shake my hand. His grip was firm, but not overpowering. Mark, I replied, sitting down. We talked for a bit, about work, the apartment, our schedules. Nothing extraordinary, but there was something about him that made me feel off balance, in a good way. Like he wasn't just another guy trying to split rent, but someone who actually saw the world differently. I figured, why not? He seemed responsible enough, and the place could use some new energy. What I didn't expect was how quickly Jason would turn my life upside down. At first, it was little things. The way he stayed up late drawing, the strange music he played softly in the background, or the way he laughed quietly at his own jokes when no one else was around. Then came the moments that caught me completely off guard, like when he'd catch me staring at him and just smile like he knew a secret I didn't. I was about to learn that needing a roommate was just the beginning. Living with Jason was going to be a whole different story. It started innocently enough. Jason moved in the next weekend, hauling a couple of bags and that sketchbook I'd seen at the cafe. The place felt different the moment he stepped inside, like the air shifted or something, but in a way that wasn't bad. Just noticeable. At first, we stuck to the usual roommate stuff, dividing up groceries, figuring out who does what chore, awkwardly agreeing on bathroom schedules. Jason was quiet but present. He'd disappear into his room for hours, then emerge with a cup of tea or a quick joke. Not the loud party animal roommate I'd half feared, but not a ghost either. One evening, I came home later than usual. Work had dragged on and I was exhausted. I found him sitting on the couch, sketchbook on his lap, headphones in. The soft glow of his laptop lit up his face, and honestly, it looked like he was in his own little world. I didn't want to interrupt, so I grabbed a beer from the fridge and settled on the armchair across from him. After a few minutes, Jason pulled out one earbud. Long day? You could say that, I muttered, running a hand through my hair. He nodded. I get it. Sometimes it's like the world expects you to be on all the time, but you just want to disappear for a bit. That line hit home more than I expected. I hadn't really talked about how burnt out I'd been feeling lately. Not with anyone, really. Yeah, exactly, I said, surprising myself with how easily the words came out. You ever get tired of pretending everything's fine? Jason looked up, those intense eyes softening. All the time. Then he smiled, a real smile this time. You're not alone. Something about that moment settled over me. Like suddenly, I wasn't just the guy who needed a roommate to split rent anymore. I was someone who might actually find a connection here. Days turned into weeks, and the awkward edges started to smooth out. We developed this easy rhythm. Jason would make coffee in the morning. I'd pick up breakfast on my way home. We'd binge watch shows that neither of us wanted to admit we liked. It wasn't perfect, but it felt real. One night, we ended up on the couch, sharing a blanket, watching some cheesy sci-fi flick. Jason nudged me when the main character made a ridiculous decision. Seriously? Who writes this stuff? I laughed, and for a moment I realized how much I was enjoying just being there with him. Then it happened. The power went out, total blackout. The kind where the whole neighborhood is just dark. Jason pulled his phone out, using the flashlight app to guide us to the kitchen. We found some candles buried in a drawer, and he lit them, their flickering glow filling the living room. I looked over at him, his face half lit, eyes reflecting the flames. You know, I said, I always thought living alone was supposed to be peaceful. Turns out, having someone here makes the silence less scary. He smiled again, that same quiet, knowing smile. Company helps. We sat there in the dark, the city noises muffled but present outside the windows. It was one of those rare moments where words felt unnecessary and the space between us was comfortable. Later, as the lights flickered back on, I caught him looking at me, like he was debating whether to say something. Instead, he shrugged and went to grab us some snacks. But I could tell something had shifted. The next morning, I found a folded piece of paper on the kitchen counter with a simple note. Dinner at my place tonight? I cook. Jay, I hesitated for a second. Me? Dinner at his place? I hadn't even been invited over before. For a moment, I wondered if I should just say no and keep everything as it was. Then, I remembered how strange it felt to be alone lately, how much I'd started to look forward to those little moments with Jason. I'm in, I texted back. That night, his apartment was a small, cozy mess of art supplies, half-finished drawings pinned everywhere, and the smell of something delicious cooking. Jason was surprisingly nervous, fiddling with a pot holder as he stirred a sauce. You cook a lot, I asked, trying to break the tension. He laughed, a bit awkwardly. Not really, but I like trying. Dinner was simple but good. We talked about everything and nothing. The kind of conversation that happens when you're starting to feel comfortable around someone but aren't quite there yet. At one point, he showed me a sketch he'd been working on, a portrait of someone with eyes that looked almost exactly like his. Who's this? I asked. He shrugged. Someone important. The way he said it made me wonder if he meant me, but I didn't push. After dinner, we ended up on his tiny balcony looking out over the city lights. Jason reached out, brushing a stray hair from my forehead. My heart skipped, and for a moment, it felt like the whole world had narrowed down to just us. I wanted to say something, anything, but all I could manage was, "Thanks for tonight." He smiled, the kind of smile that makes you feel seen. Me too. I walked home that night thinking about how I'd gone from needing a roommate to wanting something I didn't even know I was looking for. And somehow, Jason had become the reason I wasn't so sure I wanted to be alone anymore. In the days that followed, I found myself more aware of Jason than I'd ever expected to be of a roommate. It wasn't just the way he moved around the apartment or the quiet hum of his music. It was the little things. Like how he always seemed to remember my coffee order before I said it, or how he'd leave those tiny hand-scrawled notes stuck on my bedroom door when he went out. Stuff like, "Don't forget your umbrella," or "Saw your favorite ice cream on sale." It was oddly sweet and, honestly, kind of unnerving how well he seemed to know me already. One evening, I came home earlier than usual, and the apartment was dark except for the light spilling out from Jason's room. I hesitated for a second, wondering if I should just call out or knock, but curiosity got the better of me. I wandered over and knocked softly. "Come in," he called, The door creaked open, and there he was, sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by piles of paper and pencils. His eyes lit up when he saw me. "Hey," he said, voice quieter than usual. "What are you working on?" I asked, stepping inside. He motioned to the sketches scattered around. Portraits of people, cities, even some surrealist pieces that looked like they were torn from dreams. "Trying to get better. I've been stuck on this one for days." He pointed to a drawing of a city street, but instead of cars or people, it was filled with shadows and flickering lights, like something out of a noir film. I sat down beside him, watching his hands move as he added shading. "You're really good," I said. Jason shrugged, a little embarrassed. "Thanks. It helps to have someone to show it to." For a moment, the room was silent except for the scratch of pencil on paper. Then he looked at me, eyes searching. "Do you ever feel like you're just waiting for something? Like life is happening around you, but you're stuck on pause?" I swallowed hard because, yeah, I felt that a lot lately. All the time. He nodded. "I think that's why I like drawing. It's like I'm creating a world where I'm not stuck." There was something so raw and honest in that moment, I almost forgot to breathe. "Maybe you're not stuck," I said. Jason smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Maybe you're right." We fell into an easy conversation after that, one of those rare talks where you don't have to pretend or hold back. He told me about his childhood, growing up in a small town where he always felt out of place, about how art was the only thing that made sense to him when everything else felt chaotic. I shared some of my own stories, the ones I rarely told anyone, about how I'd moved to the city chasing a career that wasn't quite what I wanted, about nights spent wondering if I'd ever find someone who got me. By the time the clock hit midnight, neither of us wanted to say goodbye. "Stay," Jason said quietly. I hesitated, then nodded. We curled up on the floor, surrounded by his sketches, the city's distant sounds humming through the window, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I wasn't alone at all. The next few weeks felt like a blur, in the best way possible. We fell into this strange, beautiful routine that was part friendship, part something else I wasn't quite ready to name. Jason would make these late-night playlists filled with songs I'd never heard but somehow loved. I'd bring over takeout, and we'd binge-watch old movies, quoting lines and laughing until our sides hurt. One Saturday, Jason surprised me with tickets to a small art show downtown. "I want you to see what I do outside these walls," he said, eyes gleaming with nervous excitement. We wandered through the gallery, me trying to keep up as he pointed out pieces and artists that inspired him. Then we stopped in front of a collection of portraits that looked familiar. "These are mine," he said softly. I stared, realizing that half of them were the same people he'd drawn in his room. Each one felt alive, like I could almost hear their stories just by looking. "Your work is incredible," I said, genuinely amazed. Jason shrugged again, but this time, there was pride there too. After the show, we walked out into the crisp night air. The city lights flickered around us as we strolled, shoulders brushing occasionally. Then, without warning, Jason stopped and looked at me. "Can I tell you something?" I nodded, heart pounding. "I haven't been honest with you about everything. There's a reason I've kept people at a distance." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath. "I'm scared. Scared of getting close, scared of being hurt. I've been burned before, and it's easier to keep walls up." I stepped closer. "I get that, but maybe you don't have to do it alone." Jason's eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw a vulnerability that made me want to protect him. "Maybe," he whispered. We stood there for a long moment, the city buzzing around us, but it felt like we were in our own little universe. "I'm glad you moved in," I said. Jason smiled, that familiar smirk turning into something warmer. "Me too." And just like that, everything started to change. After that night, something shifted between us. It was subtle at first. Longer glances, a touch that lingered just a little too long when passing each other in the hallway. The kind of moments that make you question whether your heart is playing tricks or finally catching up with reality. I found myself paying more attention to Jason's little habits. How he bit his lower lip when he was deep in thought, how his laugh could go from quiet chuckle to full-on snort if something caught him off guard. I caught myself making excuses to sit next to him on the couch, even when I was perfectly comfortable alone. It was confusing and exhilarating all at once. One evening, after a particularly exhausting week at work, I came home feeling drained and more than a little defeated. I wasn't even sure why. It was just one of those days when everything seemed heavier than usual. Jason was there, of course, sitting cross-legged on the floor with his sketchbook balanced on his knees. "Rough day?" he asked without looking up. "Yeah," I admitted, dropping my bag by the door. "Everything feels like it's hitting me all at once." He set his pencil down and patted the spot next to him. "Come here." I hesitated for a second, but then sank down beside him, feeling the weight of the day start to lift a little just from being near him. Without thinking, I reached out and rested my head on his shoulder. Jason stiffened for a heartbeat, but didn't pull away. Instead, he shifted closer, and for a few quiet minutes, we just sat there. No words were needed. Eventually, he broke the silence. "You know, sometimes I think I'm better at drawing feelings than saying them out loud." I chuckled softly. "Same here." He glanced down at me, his eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "Mark, I don't want to mess this up or scare you off." "Jason, I'm already here. And I'm not going anywhere," I said, surprising myself with the sincerity in my voice. He smiled, that hint of a smirk still there, but warmer now. Good. A few days later, we had something of an unplanned date. Neither of us called it that, of course. We just ended up at that little diner down the block, the one I'd been people watching from my window for months. Jason was unusually chatty, telling me stories about his childhood, the crazy antics that made me laugh until my stomach hurt, and the quieter moments that made me realize how much he'd carried on his own. We shared a milkshake, 2 straws in all, and when I reached over to brush a crumb off his lip, his eyes flicked to mine with an intensity that made my skin tingle. "Do you ever think about what it'd be like if things were different? If we hadn't ended up as roommates?" I asked, mostly to break the sudden tension. Jason shrugged but didn't look away. "I'm glad we did." There it was again, that simple sentence that felt like a promise. Later, back at the apartment, we settled on the couch, side by side, the world outside quiet in the early hours of the morning. I could feel the heat radiating from him, the way his breath caught now and then. I wanted to close the small gap between us, but held back, unsure how he'd react. Then, almost like he read my mind, Jason reached out and took my hand. His fingers were warm and steady, and for the first time, I didn't feel scared. "Mark," he started, then stopped. I squeezed his hand. "I'm here." And just like that, the walls he'd built around himself started to crumble in the most beautiful way. But real life isn't always perfect, and soon enough, the cracks began to show. One night, we got into an argument. It wasn't about anything huge, just a miscommunication about chores that spiraled into something deeper. Jason snapped at me in a way that felt sharper than I expected, and I fired back with words I immediately regretted. We stood there, the silence heavy and thick, both of us breathing too fast. "I'm sorry," Jason said finally, voice low. "Me too," I replied. It was the first real fight we'd had, and somehow it made me realize how much I cared, that when it hurt, it really hurt. After that, we made a point to be more open. We talked about our fears, our pasts, what we wanted from this strange new thing we were building together. It wasn't easy, but it was honest. One rainy afternoon, I found Jason curled up on the couch, looking out the window like he was miles away. I sat beside him, nudging him gently. "Hey," I said softly. He looked over, eyes glassy. "I'm just scared. Scared that if this works, it'll end badly, that I'll lose you." I pulled him into a hug, holding him close. "We don't know what the future holds, but right now I want you, and I'm not going anywhere." He rested his head on my shoulder, and in that moment, everything felt right. Living with Jason had started as a practical solution to a problem, a roommate to share rent, bills, the daily grind. But it turned into something so much more than I could have imagined. He was no longer just the guy who moved in. He was the person I wanted to come home to, the one I trusted with my messy, complicated life. And as I lie here now, with his fingers entwined in mine and the city humming softly outside, I realize I didn't just find a roommate. I found someone worth risking everything for. We'd settled into a kind of comfortable chaos. Two lives overlapping in this small apartment, a shared space that somehow felt bigger when we were together. But of course, nothing stays simple for long. It was a Thursday night when everything started to feel a little off. I'd just gotten home from work, the usual hurried pace still buzzing in my veins, when I found Jason sitting at the kitchen table, his sketchbook open but untouched in front of him. His fingers drummed lightly on the surface, but his eyes were fixed on the floor. "Hey," I said, dropping my bag by the door. He looked up quickly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hey," I poured us both a glass of water and sat down across from him. "Everything okay?" He hesitated, twisting a pencil between his fingers. "Yeah, just tired, I guess." That was Jason's go-to, and I knew better than to push too hard. But something about the way he avoided my gaze set off a little alarm in my chest. "Want to talk about it?" I offered. He shrugged, but his shoulders were tight. "I'm fine, really." I wanted to believe him, but the distance in his voice was new. It made me wonder if maybe I'd crossed some invisible line without realizing it. The next few days were a strange quiet. We were still roommates, still sharing space, but Jason had pulled inward, and I felt like there was a wall between us that wasn't there before. One night, I caught him staring out the window, the city lights reflecting in his eyes like distant stars. I sat down beside him, the silence stretching comfortably before I spoke. "Jason, I don't want to mess this up." He turned to me, searching my face. "You haven't. I'm scared." "Scared of what?" "Of everything. Of getting close, of losing control, of being hurt." His voice was barely a whisper. I reached out, brushing a hand over his knuckles. "I get that. But you're not alone in this. We can take it slow, figure it out together." He looked at me then, really looked, and for a moment, I thought I saw hope flicker in his eyes. "Okay," he said softly. "Together." A few weeks later, Jason surprised me with something I hadn't expected. A visit to his favorite spot in the city. It was a small, hidden garden, tucked between two buildings, a quiet oasis with soft grass and old stone benches. We sat there for hours talking about dreams and fears, art and music, and the weird little things that make us who we are. At one point, he reached over and took my hand, fingers intertwining naturally. "I'm glad you came into my life," he said. I smiled, squeezing his hand. "Me too." That night, as we walked back to the apartment under the glow of streetlights, I felt like the pieces were finally falling into place. Not perfectly, but real. But life loves to throw curveballs. One morning, I woke up early to find Jason standing at the window, a phone pressed to his ear, his face unreadable. When he saw me, he quickly ended the call and turned around. "Everything okay?" I asked, though I already felt the tension thick in the air. He hesitated, then shook his head. "No, it's my ex." My stomach dropped. I'd known about his past relationships, but hearing it out loud made it real. He's been persistent, wanting to meet, talk things out. I nodded slowly, trying to hide the sting of jealousy. "Do you want to see him?" Jason looked torn. "I don't know. Part of me wants closure. Part of me is terrified it'll mess everything up." I took a deep breath. "Whatever you decide, I'm here." He gave me a small, grateful smile. "Thanks, Mark." The night of the meeting, Jason was anxious. He dressed carefully, avoiding eye contact. Before he left, he pulled me into a tight hug. "Wish me luck?" "Good luck," I said, meaning it. He nodded and was gone. Hours later, Jason returned, looking exhausted but lighter somehow. "It was hard," he admitted, sinking onto the couch beside me. "Do you feel better?" "Yeah. Closure feels like a good thing." We talked until the early hours, unpacking emotions and reassuring each other. That night, wrapped in his arms, I realized how much I wanted to be his anchor. Days turned into months. We moved from roommates to something more. Not rushed or pressured, but natural and steady. We learned each other's quirks. The way Jason liked his coffee black, how he hummed when he was focused, how he always left the bathroom light on. I learned to trust him with my vulnerabilities, and he trusted me with his fears. One Saturday, while cooking dinner together, Jason caught me off guard. "Mark," he said softly, "I know I'm not the easiest person to love." I turned to him, hands covered in sauce. "Who is?" He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. I mean it, but I want to be better. For us. I smiled, stepping closer. You don't have to change. I love you just the way you are. He looked up, eyes shining. I love you too. Sometimes, living with someone isn't just about sharing a space. It's about sharing pieces of yourself you never thought you would. About breaking down walls and letting someone in. Jason wasn't the roommate I expected, but he became so much more. The unexpected heart in my life. The one who turned my world inside out in the best way. As I sit here now, fingers laced together, I'm grateful for that Craigslist ad and the wild, beautiful mess that followed. Because sometimes, needing a roommate isn't about the rent. It's about finding the right person to come home to. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when everything finally clicked into place. Jason and I were sprawled out on the couch, a half-finished puzzle between us and the soft hum of a playlist he'd made in the background. The kind of lazy day where nothing urgent demands your attention, and the world feels just a little softer around the edges. I watched him as he carefully fitted a piece into the puzzle, his brow furrowed in concentration. There was this peacefulness about him. No smirks, no guarded walls, just Jason being completely himself. And I felt this swell of something I hadn't quite allowed myself to fully admit before. This was home. He looked up, catching me staring. What? Nothing, I said, smiling. Just thinking about how lucky I am. His lips curved into that shy, half smile I'd come to adore. I was thinking the same thing. We didn't say much after that, but it didn't matter. The quiet between us was comfortable, filled with the unspoken understanding that we'd found something rare. Not the kind of whirlwind romance you see in movies, but something deeper, built on shared struggles, late-night talks, and the kind of companionship that makes even the mundane moments meaningful. Later that evening, as the city lights flickered outside our window, Jason reached over and took my hand. His touch was gentle but steady, like a promise. Mark, I know we started this as just roommates, but I want more. I want us. I looked into his eyes. Those same intense eyes that had once made me hesitate, but now felt like the safest place I knew. I want that too. No grand gestures. No sweeping declarations. Just two people, quietly choosing each other. Living with Jason taught me that sometimes, what you think you need isn't what you end up wanting. I needed a roommate to share rent, but I found someone to share my life with. Someone who challenges me, grounds me, and makes me laugh when things get tough. And maybe that's the best kind of love, the kind that sneaks up on you unexpectedly and stays around longer than you ever thought possible. As I sit here now, hand in hand with Jason, I feel certain of one thing. This is just the beginning.